But first of all, hate speech and discrimination. And the reason this has been inspired is because I think all of us, more and more, are encountering those sorts of terms in our daily lives. It's also been very big at the moment with the debate around this religious discrimination bill, whether or not we should have one, what it's got a license. And Dave Sharma, who is the member for Wentworth in Sydney, he put this on his Instagram. He opposes this bill, and so does a group of what they call modern liberals within the Liberal Party at the moment, within the government. That includes people like Trent Zimmerman and Tim Wilson and Warren Entsch and Trevor Evans and Dave Sharma's another one. It's a small group of guys, but they're very, very much, they're not really liberals. They're sort of liberal in the American sense. But Dave Sharma, he's a smart man and he knows my rebuttal to this, but he has a constituency to appeal to, and that's how politics works. And he says this: we cannot have a situation where hate speech and discrimination is given equal sanction under the guise of religious freedom, or given legal sanction under the guise of religious freedom. I don't want to talk about those two things: hate speech, discrimination, accusations I think we're all familiar with. And I'll give you a very brief legal lesson in the process, but that won't be the thrust of this. But the first thing I want to point out is discrimination. What is it? Well, in a nutshell, discrimination is depriving somebody of a benefit for an irrelevant reason. So don't employ someone because they're female when that's got nothing to do with the job. Cancelling someone's medical license because they're a Buddhist when that's got nothing to do with being a doctor. Not giving someone a hotel room because of their skin colour when that's really supposed to be irrelevant in our society. But here's the point there: speech is never discrimination. It is not discrimination. It's a different thing. You can't discriminate against somebody by simply saying something. This confusion's common. When I went on Q&A, they put out a tweet. And they said this, the Q&A program: the Australian Christian lobby has thrown its support behind the case for Israel Folau's return to the NRL. Does freedom of speech outweigh the right to be protected from discrimination? So they're accusing Israel Folau of discrimination and asking whether he should be given free speech anyway. Common, very common. And you'll hear this woolly use of the word yourself. Well, I'm going to define discrimination for the benefit of the ABC and others. Discrimination might be, and I'll do it by way of an example. Discrimination might be firing somebody who is the best at what they do and effectively banning them for life because of what they said. When what they said was from a religious text because they're a Christian, and religion has no relevance to their job. That might be discrimination. Deprived of a benefit on irrelevant grounds. Speech is not discrimination. Speech is called the start of a debate. It used to be that speech was answered with speech. Person A might say something dumb, and person B says, person A, that's very dumb, and a debate proceeds. When you start fighting speech with something more than speech, like cancelling someone's career for life, that's discrimination. That's discrimination. So that's the first point. Speech is not discrimination. The second point is this, and I just want to say this quickly because this again is relevant. Discrimination is not always irrelevant. Sometimes it's legitimate. What do I mean? Well, let's say something terrible would have happened and my board would have fired me tomorrow. And let's say that I was all of a sudden, sniffing around the job market. Well, in Melbourne, they've built a swanky new Pride Centre, and I'm sure they're looking for staff. And if I decided that I might apply for a job at this Pride Centre at St Kilda in Melbourne, and I put in my resume, what do you think their reaction to my resume might be? What do you think my chances of getting that job are? Nil. Why? Well, for perfectly legitimate reasons. I can't affirm their values. I can't do it. They exist to promote certain aspects of the LGBT political cause, which I can't go along with. So of course they're not going to employ me. Values don't align. In every case where an organisation has a political or a religious purpose, they exist to make political differences and they exist to make religious differences. So of course they can discriminate on religious and political grounds. No problem. I debated Fiona Patten at the National Press Club on the religious discrimination bill. And she got up there and went to market about the idea that a faith-based organisation would prefer staff that support their faith. I said, well, hang on. You're the founder and the director of a political party. You enjoy the same rights. If you had somebody who was a signed-up, paid-up member of the Liberal Party, you wouldn't employ them. for very good reasons, and neither do you have to. There are clear exemptions in anti-discrimination law to say that you don't have to. And so again, it is difference of treatment where it's irrelevant. And if you've got a faith-based school that prefers staff that uphold their ethos, there is nothing unusual about that whatsoever. But here's my final point. It is this. Well, what I've written here actually is hate speech is a stupid phrase. Those who know that speech is not and never can be discrimination, and it can't be, that's a legal point, they resort to a phrase, hate speech, in order to stop people saying things that they don't like. It's a little bit like, however, conversion therapy, two words that don't belong together. Conversion is one thing, therapy is another. Conversion is an act of God on a life. Therapy is what you do to each other in a counsellor's office. You can't therapy someone into conversion. It doesn't work that way. You know that wasn't a phrase invented by Christians because it makes no theological sense. But here's another phrase that also, two words that don't necessarily belong together are hate and speech. Because hate is something more than speech. Leviticus 19:17 says this, "You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may certainly rebuke your neighbour, but you are not to incur sin because of him." Now notice the qualification, hate in your heart. Hate is an internal thing. It's a motive. Hate is about what's in the heart, not necessarily what's on the lips. Even a rebuke is no evidence of hate, says Leviticus, because speech and hate need to be connected by motive, and motive is the point. And hate in the heart is a very serious thing. In 1 John, we read several things. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. 1 John 2:9. Whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Verse 11. 1 John 3:15. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. 1 John 4:20. If anyone says, "I love God," and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he's not seen. In other words, if you say you love God, it is necessary that you love your neighbour. That's just a natural consequence of it. If you've got hate in your heart, well, you're not loving God. You're a liar. Or, and this is a really important point, when it comes to politics, when it comes to the culture wars so-called, when it comes to a lot of false ideologies that we talk about, and you've got a booklet on cultural Marxism, for example, and identity politics, hatred is a genuine problem. Hatred in the biblical sense means to detest somebody and desire their harm. It is easy to detest political foes. It also means, and I looked this up in a concordance, it also means pursuing with hatred. You know, to have an attitude to a person in a way that won't let go, that pursues after them. You know, it's the sort of attitude that comes through a clenched fist and gritted teeth and determination. And I see a lot of that in politics. This whole creed of oppression and victims and oppressors, which is sort of the Marxist way of dividing up society at the moment into classes, and that, the system therefore needs to be attacked and destroyed and overthrown, and classes of people need to be undermined and brought down. That sort of thing does breed hatred, because it desires the destruction, and it pursues, for the purposes of destruction, a person or a class of people. And that is why Scripture says that the hater is a murderer, because the hater is wanting their destruction in his heart. And that is to kill someone in your heart. And here's a challenge for all Christians, and it is to be politically alert, to be culturally aware, and to care and not hate. As I said on Q&A, one of the things we must never lose sight of is the fact that every person is first a soul to be saved, first and foremost. Every other person is a person for whom the death of Jesus Christ can save them and bring them into sublime and total blessing. And we need to love them like that, to desire their ultimate blessing. And we need to act towards them in light of it. I think C.S. Lewis says that there's no such, every single person is an eternal soul. And we need to remember that. Because it could have been you, but God redeemed you. The hater is always someone with an inadequate understanding of the grace of God on their own lives. And they don't realize what mercy they've had. And so therefore they don't show mercy to others. And so when I look at somebody like, and I'll just mention the man of the hour in terms of the sort of stuff we're pushing against, Daniel Andrews, I need to try and pray that he would be improved or removed, is the prayer that one of my staff always says. Pray that he be improved or removed. And pray first and desire first that he be a Saul of Tarsus. I did an episode on Daniel Andrews on the truth of it, and it's not very pretty. It really isn't pretty. If he was written up, as I was saying in Perth, about if some of our leaders were written up in the Old Testament, they'd get the full Old Testament treatment. He would be written up very dimly indeed for what he's been responsible for and the agendas he's pushed now over he's the longest serving state premier in the country, over a very long time. But of course, if that can't be done in God's will, then it is that he'd be Qatar. But I don't actually pray for him to fall down the stairs and break his back. That's not my prayer. And I think that was a temptation when that happened for some people, to rejoice in someone's misery. We should never be those people, never. Because to hate someone, to desire their destruction, is to murder them in your heart. It's a very serious thing. Hate has been removed from its motive. Hate speech now is not about your motive at all. Hate speech is about the content of your speech. It's what you say. And it's interesting, it's a very clever way to shut down certain opinions, certain points of view. And it's been very interesting to me to realise in recent times the sorts of things that you see these hate speech and similar sort of stuff built around. You can go through the list of attributes, for example, in a hate speech or an anti-vilification statute, and you see that they follow a certain pattern. You'll have things in there like, let's just say some of the things that you'd be accused of hate speech over. Race is a big one with the rise of critical race theory. Bigger in America, I know, but it's coming here. Sex, male and female. Gender identity. Sexual orientation. Abortion. There's 5 things. 5 things, absolute hot button issues over which Christians are regularly accused of hatred because of their views. It's interesting to me, all of these things actually are God's good things revealed in creation. All of them. All of them are attacks on the Creator and what has been said by the Creator about his creation. Let's go through it. You can think of something like sex, male and female, right? So what does it say? Well, male and female he created them. In the image of God he created them. That is under direct attack. Not just from hate speech laws, but these are the categories of oppression that the Marxists set up so that we have to deconstruct male and female, which is what's going on in the schools at the moment with the things like the Good Society, in order to get rid of the oppression that's there. So it's undermining of one of God's good things, a creation blueprint given for our good. Or indeed, you can look at something like sexual orientation. People can come up with all sorts of things in terms of what they do with their bodies. But it's very simple in Genesis. There's only one thing given. And the one thing is, woman was made for man because it was not good for man to be alone. Therefore, as Jesus says, for this reason, he says, a man leaves his father and mother and holds fast to his wife, the two become one. That's the answer. It's a creation statement. Again, this creation reality is under attack. You look at something like critical race theory, which is worming its way into relationships between the races. And do you know one of the things that critical race theory says? I'm thinking like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. But it's very much in the new education curriculum review. And I'll do an episode on that at some point. Very, very strong. They're bringing it into the Indigenous issues now. The thing about critical race theory is it says that to be colourblind is to be racist. And so if you say, no, race doesn't matter, that is a racist statement and a racist outlook and a racist belief. What does the Apostle Paul say about creation and race? He says, he himself, that is God, gives to all people life and breath and everything, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation that they would seek God. In other words, there's one human race. That's a statement of fact. And all of us are equal in the sight of God, and that's the greatest equality in the world. You think of abortion, it's another creation thing. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. What happened to that command? And that's under attack in all sorts of ways. Families are under attack. That's also a creation thing. Gender identity is under attack. And this is a big one for young people at the moment. What's a man? What is a woman? How should those things be expressed? God had different things in mind when he made a man and a woman. That's absolutely clear from Genesis. Nothing could be clearer when you read Genesis 1 to 3. That's not to say that every single woman has to do a certain thing and every single man has to do a certain thing. Real life doesn't play out that way. But it does mean that God had different things in mind when he made them. He was thinking of mothers when he made women, it says so. He was thinking of workers when he made men, it says so. He was thinking of a keeper, he was thinking of someone who can defend and so forth and be strong when he made a man. That was what it says so. He was thinking of a person who can actually strengthen and help people when he made a woman as a helper and so forth. That's very clear. But all of these things are just unhelpful stereotypes. And the Good Society program that's currently in schools says that this is on the same level as domestic violence in terms of damaging gender stereotypes. And so then it says, well, boys do an exercise where you put on some lipstick and a dress and talk to each other about how it makes you feel. That's like year 5. That sort of thing is going on all over the place. These are attacks on God's good creation things. And all of this is licensed under the concept of identity, which is, how do you feel though? Forget what God says. Forget what creation tells you, because this is the thing about creation. Is it's something that's actually baked into the very fabric of how things really are. I mean, you need to look at a person's anatomy and you know straight away that they're different and they're designed for certain things, and so on and so forth. It's baked into creation. And the fact is that the identity concept says, but how do you feel? What do you really want to do? What are your passions? What are your desires? And in year 5, they make an identity poster. And they have to actually ask themselves, what are their passions? What are their desires? What are their feelings? By the way, here's a helpful list of attributes that might help you come up with some of the answers, is sort of the way that it goes. And then they write their identity poster. And the idea is, aha, if that's how you feel, then that is the meaning of life. And you need to live all that out and discover it and blah, 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 blah. Here's the fact. The argument has always been the same. Are God's good things there for our harm, or are they there for our good? It's been like this from the beginning. Adam and Eve, they had a choice. Has God really said? Oh boy, that fruit looks tasty. They chose badly. It's been the same right throughout. And it's incredible to me to see how that actually at the end of the day, so many of these ideologies are simply suits of clothes worn by the old-fashioned human tendency towards rebellion. It's as simple as that. And there are many people who would say that God's ways are not for our good and not for our blessing. And yet they are. I want to read to you Psalm 1 and close out this section. Psalm 1 puts it very clearly. It says, "Blessed is the person who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the ways of God, the principles of God, the ordinances of God. And on his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and whatever he does prospers." It says, "The Lord knows the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked will perish." Do you know, this is why woke, to use that phrase, consistently undermines faith. Because actually what it is a sophisticated way of attacking God's good order and God's good laws. Actually, these things are what we're made for. And if only people would realize that, they would find in them the blessing and the liberty that the psalmist describes.